welcome to our program today. Rafej, a conversation with the chef and author Ebra Berens. Rafej, a practical guide to vegetables, 100 plus recipes and 230 plus variations, is the Baron's first cookbook written from her experiences as a chef, former farmer, and everyday eater. This book, Rafej, was named a 2020 Michigan Notable Book by the Library of Michigan. This program will include a live talk, recipe demo, and a question and answer session. You can post all your questions through the chat feature here, through chat feature here. Thank you. I will hand it over to Ebra now. Hi, Ebra.
Hi, thank you so much for having me, and to everyone for attending. It's such a privilege to get to be here because I, just really love libraries so much, and to be kind of highlighted by the Michigan library system is really such an honor. Libraries are such a important community meeting place, and source for sharing information, and doing a lot of the things that I've needed throughout my life to make copies or look something up, or be able to get the paper and things like that. So when it was kind of suddenly clear that we weren't going to be able to do the library visits, I'm so grateful to everyone, including Ravi Shankar, who put all of this together to be able to come and visit with you tonight. So thank you for taking time out of your Wednesday to sit with me. So yes, my name is Abra Berens, and I am both a chef and an author and a former farmer. And this is my cookbook, Roughage. It's my first cookbook. And this book, I was going to kind of open up the evening tonight with just a conversation about me and my story and how this book came to be. And then we'll do a demonstration based around cauliflower. And then after that, we'll open it back up to questions. So if you have questions throughout the time, feel free to put them in the chat session, and then I will answer them all at the end, including ones about the demonstration. So, and we pre-recorded the demonstration because I live in a very rural part of Michigan, and our internet is tends to be a bit spotty. So that way we can for sure get it. So let's get started. So my story is was born and raised in Michigan on the west side of the state. I grew up in a farming family, but my parents were also both anesthesiologists. So my grandparents were farmers, and I saw that part of the business, but never really thought that much about it until I was at the University of Michigan and went to undergrad there, and then worked at the Zingerman's Deli kind of for about 5 years I was there. And in that 5 years, I moved from the front of house where I was, taking orders and running people's sandwiches and ringing people up and things like that, into the kitchen. And that was, I had worked in restaurants since I was about 16. I think every farm kid, as soon as they can drive legally and get the town job, we always desperately want to. And so it felt like a really, a nice place to come home to, was to go back into a restaurant kitchen. And I never expected to start cooking there. So it was thanks to my chef and mentor, Roger Bowser, who, was always answering all of my questions, and finally saw the ability for me to start cooking when he needed some help one day. So that's how I got started cooking. And it was also Roger who really kind of opened my eyes to the local food movement. At that point, we had a garden growing up, so I knew some bits about seasonality, but didn't really understand the larger sort of movement in the food world towards sourcing, especially produce, but lots of regional food locally, and kind of eating by the seasons. And so Zingerman's, as you all probably know, is a really big business, and they're always busy, and they have a set menu. So Roger was bringing in as much local produce as he could into such a high volume business. And it was really showcased in the salad case. And so it was there that I first started seeing, different lettuces than I had ever seen before, or heirloom tomatoes, or, different squash besides butternut and acorn and things like that, and got really excited about what that food was, and the farmers that were growing it. And I'll never forget the first time, one year we were harvesting all of our own asparagus during asparagus season for the restaurant. And so we got up super early one day, went out to the asparagus field. I forget the name of the farm now. And we're just snapping asparagus stalks. And I had never seen an asparagus plant in the ground before. And I had certainly never eaten raw asparagus. And, it was that morning, just like straight from the field right into my mouth. And it was, a really eye-opening way to engage with food. And it resonated with me, having grown up on a farm and knew how much hard work that was. And there's kind of recognizing the disconnect between how a lot of our food is grown and how it's consumed. And that has become, I guess, my North Star for what sort of work I want to do, is to try to always connect people in that way. And 100 years ago, about 30% of our population in America were farmers, and today it's about 3%. And there's lots of reasons for that, and we could debate food policy all night. But the thing that I find most interesting about that is that means that the other 97% have less and less daily interaction with farmers, and really understanding the work that goes into raising something as simple as an onion or celery, these ingredients we kind of take for granted. And so, to fast forward a little bit, I was at Zingerman's, and then just was kind of deciding if I wanted to go into the Peace Corps, where I had gotten in, or if I wanted to pursue cooking, and decided instead to take the leap and pursue cooking. And I went to a really small cooking school in the south of Ireland called Ballymaloe, which is on a 100-acre working organic farm. Everything we were cooking in our school system, like throughout the session, was grown there, or it was brought in from regional farmers. And so it was a really kind of quick sort of master class in cooking basic technique. And it wasn't, I mean, it was only a 12-week program, so it wasn't like going to the Culinary Institute of America, where it's 2.5 years and you're learning all of these things. I feel like Ballymaloe really, it gave me two things. It gave me the ability to walk into a restaurant kitchen and feel like I kind of knew what was going on. And so I wasn't quite so nervous, or I felt like at least I knew the questions to ask. But also it showed me, again, kind of committed this idea of what it means to just cook what's around you. And Ballymaloe has an interesting history, because it started, Myrtle Allen was married to Ivan Albert Allen, who was a farmer, and their farm was struggling, and they had this big old English house that they needed to maintain. So she decided to let out the rooms in a kind of bed and breakfast style, and then started making meals for the folks who would come to the inn. And that's how it started. And she, nobody was making Irish country food in that way, or country style food. So she developed a reputation and a name, and became a destination. And then her daughter-in-law, Dorina, started the cooking school. And so it really, for me, kind of harkened back to some of these things I saw women in my community doing, making jams and jellies, or pickling things. I grew up on a cucumber farm that sold our cucumbers to Heinz, but then we also did a lot of pickling in our own household. And just how we kind of weave that food that's around us into a meal. So that was really cemented, and that I wanted my food to be of a place. So as I moved back to the States, I was fantasizing about having a restaurant that was on a farm, and people could come and see how the food was grown, and then enjoy it in a more traditional setting. And so in 2009, I started a farm up in Northport, Michigan, which is at the very end of Leelanau County, which is kind of the Pinky Peninsula of the state. I can do the classic Michigan thing. It's over here. I think I got that right. And so it's pretty far north, but not all the way to the UP. And we were growing vegetables on my business partner's family's land, in between two cherry orchards. And so I spent those first 3 years, I wanted to do the farming as well, mostly because we couldn't afford to hire other people. But then also so that I could learn even more about this food. I had been cooking in Chicago at that point for about a year, and still felt like there was a lot I wasn't quite seeing about how this food was coming into the restaurant. So I spent about 3 years farming, and then we were also doing these dinners underground, just at our farm, and people would turn up and then cook a 5-course meal for them. And it was when I started farming that the style of food that I make really changed. And I came up in restaurants that were really focused on nose to tail eating and big meaty cuts and lots of organ meat and things like that. And all of a sudden, I was writing these menus that were to showcase vegetables, and it was 90% vegetarian, but without feeling like it was vegetarian necessarily. Lots of beans and legumes and things like that, and some meat and some dairy, but mostly to showcase these vegetables. And um, I realized I started craving it. And so after that first year, there's a story in the book about how I was really, really broke because, as you can probably imagine, farming is not a real like high margin industry, especially when you're first starting out and you're not totally sure what you're doing. And so when I got back to Chicago, I was so excited to have a job that would pay me every month. And I started just like had been fantasizing about all the like salamis and cheeses and cake and all these things I was going to eat. And then I just realized I suddenly felt not so great. And I missed the meals that I was eating that were based around the carrots and the kale and the eggs that we still had in our garden. And so I realized at that point that I was just eating more vegetables and liking it. And simultaneously, at the farm, we were going to about 4 farmers markets a week. And I realized we were answering a lot of the same questions week in and week out. And it was things like, all right, what do I do with a beet? How do I cook it? Why are there leaves on it when you guys sell it, but not leaves on it at the store? What is kohlrabi? Can I use celery root where I would use regular celery? What's the best way to store kale? Why is that different from basil? All of those different sorts of questions. And we were cooking with everything. So it really made sense to me to try to share with people what we were making at home at night. And so that's how the book got started, because I started writing a food column for the Traverse City Record Eagle that was just that, talking about things that we were growing and what to do with them. And I realized that for me, by that point, we had been farming for a few years, and we farmed the same things every year. I mean, some little variations change, but for the most part, asparagus season happens at the same time, and then peas come on, and then green beans, and you start to see these cycles. But the meals weren't the same. The meals felt different because we were changing out the other ingredients that were with it. And so Roughage, I wanted Roughage to be a toolkit that I felt like I was developing while I was farming and talking to people and also cooking this food, and to sort of show how I think someone who's trained in restaurant kitchens starts to see the things that you can swap in and out easily. So if I don't have Parmesan, can I use pecorino? Or if I don't have carrots, can I use parsnips instead? In some things, yes, in some things, no. And how to kind of make those changes, as well as just the difference of different cooking techniques. So, if you have asparagus that's grilled, how is that different from when it's poached or when it's raw and shaved thinly into a salad? So that's how Roughage is organized. It's I always say it's sort of like an NCAA bracket, but in reverse. So you start with the winner, which is the vegetable, and then it's broken out by technique. So again, asparagus, raw, roasted, and grilled. And then after the technique, there's a full recipe. So, traditional cookbook recipe, it's written out, you can follow the steps and you'll go from there. And there's a nice picture of it. But then after that, there's also 3 variations for each one. And that is either you could make this salad with it and then have these different flavor combinations, or you can make it with this or this or this. Like, for example, in the beet chapter, it's the most sort of exemplary of the chapters, I guess. It is steam roasting beets. And so the technique, you put them in a roasting pan, put some water in there, cover them up, put them in the oven, and it's sort of a hybrid between roasting and boiling. And then peel the skin off from them and cut them into a salad. And the recipe includes, it's got smoked whitefish and sour cream and dill and sunflower seeds. But then the variations say cook the beets the exact same way. And one variation will have feta and pecans and citrus and mint for in the wintertime, or pair it with apples and cheddar and parsley and walnuts in the fall. Or you could put it with, boiled wheat berries and dried cherries and make like a warm kind of grain salad for in the winter. So nothing about the beets has changed. It's just what it's being presented with. And then the second technique in the beet chapter is a beet puree. And so it's, you take those steam roasted beets, blend them in a food processor with some olive oil, and then you can use that to dress. The recipe is for beet dressed pasta with pickled golden raisins and poppy seeds. So again, very kind of Eastern European in flavor combination, but you could use that same puree to make a soup, or you could blend it with white beans and make like a pink white bean hummus, or you could put it on a sandwich with some goat cheese and arugula or something like that. So it's really showing all of the different ways that you can use that same beet puree that is maybe wouldn't look the same on the plate at all. And with each chapter, so there's 29 vegetables in the book, and each chapter has a little notes box on what you're looking for when you go to the market, on how to store it or how to select it. And then once you get it home, how to store it, what things will last for a long time, and what things do you have to kind of use up, and the best way to store them. And then also just other notes on it, things like, for stick with beets, I was sort of, amazed to learn that beets and chard are the same base plants. They're sister species, and they were bred so that beets showed a really nice big root ball but kind of fibrous leaves. But then the Swiss chard, the plant, was bred instead to have big beautiful tender leaves but a very kind of insignificant root ball underneath. And I just find those things so interesting, and so wanted to include those little notes. And it kind of made it make sense to me that, oh, if I don't have beets, but I want to add something to it and I want to add a green to it, Swiss chard is going to be sort of a natural complement, because it tends to have some of those same flavors, or at least a similar kind of heritage, I guess. But so that's the rundown. And then, well, also in Roughage, there's little essays. So essays about, how food is produced, how it worked in my family, little stories about growing it, kind of funny stories here and there about, all of our like trials and tribulations along the way. And so really just connecting people to the fact that this food takes work to grow, and what that means, and all of those things. So and then beyond writing this book, I am also a chef at a vegetable farm over in Southwest Michigan. So I'm over at Grainer Farm in Three Oaks, Michigan, and we do meals on our farm that are based around the things that we grow. So between writing and cooking, that's kind of, and doing wonderful library events, that's where we get started. So that is kind of my rundown on the book and on me. And we are going to go in just a second to like I said, a pre-recorded demo on cauliflower, and making 4 different salads out of cauliflower from kind of a single head of cauliflower. So I'm going to see, I was downloading it earlier, so let me see if it came up. Otherwise, Uma is going to take over for me. It's just 1 second. All right, I think it has not yet finished downloading. So Uma, if you're
yeah, sure, I can help you with that. And let me go and just share screen. Mm-hmm.
And if anybody has any questions along the way during the video, or anything right now, again, feel free to add those to the chat function, and I'll see them and either respond or we'll read them out loud. So we'll go.
Okay, let me go from the
cauliflower. And I feel like with
1 minute. Okay, let me go to full screen and from the beginning. Yes, this is 3 minutes. Okay.
So this is a series of salads that we're gonna make out of just shaved cauliflower. And I feel like with vegetables, there's so many more salads out there than a traditional green salad or, a tomato fresh mozzarella salad. They can really be a side dish on their own, and especially when you're putting multiple different types of salads together to make a full meal, you get lots of different textures and flavors and colors, and it really makes for a whole meal. That said, there's only so many vegetables that we generally have on hand, and it's not like for a middle of the week meal you're gonna pull together a big feast of cardoons and whatever else fancy thing you don't see that often. Maybe you are, and that's okay too. But for me, I tend to rely on things like cabbage, cauliflower, broccoli, the really hearty vegetables that you can buy if you're going to the store only every couple of weeks and that are going to store in your fridge just fine. And cauliflower is maybe one of my favorites of those because it is endlessly changeable. It has a very neutral flavor but a nice crunch to it, and so you can make all sorts of different things out of it. And my favorite way to have it is just having it raw, like you would on a veggie platter, but instead of having it in the little florets that we've always seen, shaving it into thin wafers. So if you're taking a head of cauliflower like this one, I've cut it in half down the side and then cut it again into quarters. And that just gives you a nice flat surface that you can be working with. So with your knife, I like to get in and cut away the core and then peel off these leaves. These leaves are good to eat if they're not especially brown like these are, have a little bit of kind of that slipperiness, then I would pull them off and you could saute them in a pan with some olive oil, a little bit of onion and white wine, and have that as a side too. But for right now, for our purposes today, we're gonna discard them. And then to shave it thinly, all you're doing is just cutting it really thin. So you can use a knife, you could use a mandolin, really anything. And I like to just go slow, hold your cauliflower with your free hand, and it's gonna shred a little bit and it's gonna fly, but that's just how it goes. It's a little bit like a kitchen confetti. And I like to just kind of slowly go down the sides so that you get these nice kind of cross sections of it. So you're getting lots of different textures. So ones that are thicker like this and thinner like that, that's all fine. They're all gonna go together and give you some textural difference within the cauliflower salad itself. So as you go, if a stray one like this one falls off, just flip it over. And with this, it's a little bit easier to handle, so you can go a touch faster. When it starts to get unruly, wobbling around on that side, just give it a flip and go through again. And if that feels like too much, then you can just break down the individual florets and keep going. And so that one head of cauliflower, 1/4 of the head of cauliflower, has already given us a nice pile of shaved veg that would probably feed 2 people as a side. And if you were to combine that with some beans or something like that, it's gonna be a full entree portion. So for salad number 1 of our variations on a shaved cauliflower theme, I really love smoked whitefish mayo. It is effectively just making a mayonnaise, whizzing up an egg, drizzling in some oil, squeeze of lemon until it makes a nice thick mayonnaise, and then adding some smoked whitefish or tuna or mackerel, anything like that, and blending it up. It's an Italian condiment. They call it tonnato. I call it mayo. And so what we're gonna do is take a little bit of our shaved cauliflower, put it into a bowl, and then with some olive oil, just give it a nice little drizzle, and a pinch of salt, so that you're seasoning kind of each component along the way, and just giving it a nice little toss to coat the cauliflower in a little bit of that oil and salt. Now, as soon as the salt hits the cauliflower, it will start to pull some of the water from it, so it's better to do kind of just before serving. We've got our plate down, and what I'm gonna do is spoon a little bit of this smoked whitefish mayo on the bottom of the plate, which is where the richness is. And then heap the cauliflower right on top. Do a couple leaves of arugula. You could also use something like a radicchio, any sort of kind of slightly bitter, peppery green. Endive, frisee, any of those chicories would be great. And then a little bit more arugula over the top. I like to do just a little squeeze of lemon. And you could certainly toss the arugula and the cauliflower together. It's easier to control how it looks on the plate if you do it in separate layers. But if that doesn't matter to you, toss it all up in a big bowl and be just fine. And then to finish it, just a few pumpkin seeds. You could also use something like sunflower seeds or some chopped up almonds or pecans, things like that. And then you've got a really nice little salad that would go great as a lunch in the summertime or alongside any number of other dishes for a main course. So for salad number 2, we're gonna make another cauliflower salad, but this time scooping up some of the cauliflower, and instead of dressing it with olive oil, we're gonna dress it with some chili oil, which is just neutral oil, so a vegetable oil, soy, canola. This is grapeseed oil. And you heat up about a 1/4 cup, add a couple tablespoons of chili flakes to it, and then let them kind of fry in that oil. Take it off the heat, add some more neutral oil to drop the temperature so you don't burn the chili flakes, and then let it steep. So this has been steeping for about a week or so, just been on the shelf and doesn't need to be refrigerated, and you can just spoon it over any type of hot sauce, sort of like a chili crisp that you would see in a lot of grocery stores, like a sambal or sriracha kind of part of the thing. And then we've got the cauliflower, chili flakes, some dates, which will give it some sweetness to pair against the spice of the chili. And then this is just a bunch of herbs. So I would normally use either cilantro or parsley or something like that. This also has some radish microgreens in it, but you could use any type of greenery that you've got, even something like baby lettuces, anything that's gonna have a bunch of flavor to it. Little pinch of salt went in as well. And just stir it up so that you're getting an even coating of the salt and the chili oil. And I really love something like this. And let's just do one big pile of it. So I really love a salad like this to go with something like black beans, quesadillas. You could have it with like grilled summer squash, and anything that's gonna have kind of a creamy note to go alongside the spice and the sweetness of this salad. And that is salad number 2. This is shaved cauliflower with dates, chili oil, and herbs. For salad number 3, yet again, taking some cauliflower and putting it into a bowl. We're gonna dress it with some olive oil and salt. We're not really making a dressing in and of itself because we're gonna add these roasted cherry tomatoes, which have acidity in them as well. So that's where you're gonna get the pop of brightness for this salad. And this is another one that we're gonna kind of build in layers so that we can see all of the different elements together. So we've got our roasted cherry tomatoes, our baby kale, and then also some breadcrumbs. So on the plate, we'll start with a little bit of baby kale. Just a couple leaves. And again, if you're at like a picnic or something, it would be ridiculous to build all of these as individual salads. So just toss it all into a bowl and stir it around and that'll be just fine. So a little bit of kale, little drizzly, little pinch of salt, spoonful of the cauliflower, and then a couple dots of these cherry tomatoes. So these are just cherry tomatoes that have been roasted at about 350 degrees with some olive oil in them until they burst, and then their liquid reduces. You could also use fresh cherry tomatoes if you had them, whatever sort of tomato-y kind of product that you have I love using these, especially in the winter time. I'll try to put up as many into the freezer as I can in the summer and then pull them out in the winter for that kind of fresh, bright tomato flavor. So again, a little bit more cauliflower on top of the kale. Couple more tomatoes. And then I feel like every single salad, I can't think of one right now that isn't better with a little bit of garlic breadcrumbs over the top. It gives you a nice crunchy texture, a little bit of richness from the garlic and from the oil, and then the heat of that. So then we'll just brush in all those crumbs. And that is salad number 3. It's shaved cauliflower, roasted cherry tomatoes, garlic breadcrumbs, and some kale. All right, so salad number 4, fourth shot to use up some of the shaved cauliflower. So we're gonna put the last of what we shaved up into the bowl. This is a garam masala yogurt or a curry yogurt. It basically just takes curry powder, fry it in a little bit of oil to bloom the spices, and then add it to the yogurt so that you're getting kind of a nice yellowy color, and it's really perfuming all of that yogurt, along with a pinch of salt. We're gonna stir that up to evenly coat the cauliflower. And like I was saying before, cauliflower is such a mild flavor that it really pairs well with things that are stronger, in the sense of something like a garam masala, like a chili oil, like those roasted cherry tomatoes that are so flavorful, and they really just need a kind of sidekick to it, and the cauliflower can play that role. So to make our salad, got our plate down, and we'll spoon it into the center. And you do a couple of herbs. This is a mixture, again, of cilantro and microgreens, but it would be perfectly at home with parsley, or even a little bit of basil would be nice with this one. A little bit more cauliflower on top. And some extra greens. And then over the top, I'm gonna scatter, these are pan-roasted chickpeas. So chickpeas out of a can, a little bit of hot oil into a frying pan, fry them up with some salt so they get golden brown and a little bit crunchy on the outside, but still soft and creamy on the inside. You could also do them in an oven. So get a hot oven, maybe 400, 350 degrees, and then toss them with some oil and salt and let them bake until they're crisp. You could also use something like chopped almonds, crushed pecans, anything that's really gonna give you kind of that crunchy but creamy texture with it too. And so this is our 4th salad. Shaved cauliflower with curried yogurt, crispy chickpeas, and a bunch of herbs. So that's it. That's how you can take a single head of cauliflower, shave it thinly, and then make any number of different dishes. You've got everything from spicy and sweet with chili oil and dates, savory and rich with the smoked whitefish mayo, arugula, and pepitas. We've got a curried yogurt with crispy chickpeas and herbs, and then also the really tangy roasted cherry tomatoes with breadcrumbs and kale. So anything you want to do with them, you've got cauliflower for days. We use the same vegetables year in and year out, but it never has to be the same meal.
Oh my God. This is really mouth-watering salads. Now it's a dinner time and we should go for a dinner, I think.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think I have some cauliflower in my fridge, so maybe we'll have that tonight.
And I love that garam masala yogurt stuff. It is so, I have garam masala. I'm going to try this weekend that one recipe, definitely. Okay. I will go ahead and if they have any questions, I think right now.
Yeah, happy to answer any questions anybody has. Feel free to type them into the chat, or I think there's probably the ability to unmute as well. So however people would like to do it.
Okay, let me go. I didn't see any Okay, if they have any questions, I can allow them to talk. Everybody, I'm going to ask them to unmute and they can talk and they can ask questions. I think, oh my God, this is really very good, Ebra. We really loved it.
Oh, good. Well, I'm so glad, and thank you again for inviting me and for doing all the work to, make this work remotely too. I can't wait to be able to do events in person again, and hope to be able to come out to Clinton-Macomb area as soon as
Yeah.
it makes sense.
Yeah, I asked them to unmute themselves. If they have questions one by one, they can ask you whatever if they have any questions.
Great.
I have a question. I was going to ask if your book has the recipe for the smoked whitefish mayo. That sounds divine.
It does, yeah. So at the beginning of the book, there's a it's called the strong pantry section, and in that there's a lot of recipes for different dressings and sauces and things like that that show up later in the book in some of the recipes. And so yes, that's absolutely in there. And there's at the book starts out also with a recipe just for straight mayonnaise, where you can make it in your food processor by hand with a whisk, but without any sort of acid or salt to it, and taste it, and then add the salt and taste it, and add the acid and taste it. And you'll start to see kind of how to play with those two different elements to heighten the flavor on foods. And then you could take that mayo and just blend in some of the smoked fish too.
Thank you.
Of course.
Okay, there is another question. Can you quickly flip through the book? Can't unmute. There is one person, and is your cookbook available in bookstore? We have a cookbook in our library as well, and if you want, you can check it out. And I will send you the link right now, and she can also flip through the book one time.
Yes. So this is the book. That's what the spine looks like, and it is it's 465 pages. So there's a lot of vegetables, and there's also a lot of illustrations that show. Let me see if I can find one in particular. So like this image is of sauteed kale that has, different things that you could put with it kind of illustrated around the side. There's also sometimes where you can use the same thing differently. Let me see if I can find one of those. The choose your own adventure style. Of course, when I'm trying to find it, they're gone. And so maybe I can show. So each section each vegetable is a chapter, and it starts out with a big image from the farm or from being cooked or something like that, and then it goes into the recipes are there with other photos kind of throughout. And this is one of those note sections where it talks about different things about the eggplant, how to select it, and how to store it.
And also there is, okay, same question. Carol asked, where is your book available? Is it in the bookstore? And also there are some, okay. Does your book have a recipe for the smoked whitefish mayo by Deborah Harmon? She asked you that question.
Yes. So yes, that is in the book, and then the book is available in bookstores. Also, yeah, the library has it. You can check it out, or it's on Amazon. It's at Barnes and Noble. It's at any sort of independent bookstore, things like that.
Okay, Renee asked, perhaps it's obvious, but what are the health benefits for roughage?
I mean, it's an interesting question, actually, because I think that there are a lot of health benefits to eating vegetables. I think, as we kind of talk about a more plant-based diet, the benefits that I see, and again, this is sort of anecdotal, I'm not a dietitian, is that, you know, fiber, an increased fiber diet does a lot for, you know, anti-carcinogens and really just good gut health. And then also a varied diet has lots of different micronutrients. But I also believe that a lot of the micronutrients in vegetables are fat soluble. And so pairing them with good healthy fats and lots of fresh stuff feels, you know, like it's a healthier thing. And I'm sure someone much more articulate than I am can kind of go on for ages about the benefits of a plant-based diet. But I know that personally I feel better, and I crave those things, and I think it's better for the environment and better for the growers that are in our region, things like that.
Okay, then Joanne asked, it's excellent program. What is the name of the restaurant you work at and what town it is?
So the name of the farm is called Grainor Farm, and it's spelled Granor Farm. And we have a website there. We are not currently hosting meals because we're building out a new space for the dining program, and then also with the pandemic restrictions. But we do have an online farm store that's open every Friday with produce from our farm and from other producers, meat, cheese, dairy, eggs, things like that. And then I make a lot of food, like, you know, soups and stews and sides. And we have a wood-fired oven, so I do bread out of our wood-fired oven every week. And then we're hoping to be able to relaunch the dinner program sometime this summer, spring and summer. And then those dinners will go year round.
Okay, somebody asked another question. Are there soups recipes?
There are. Yeah, there's a handful of soup recipes throughout the book. I know for sure there's like a celery root and apple soup. There's a parsnip soup and a squash soup. So yes, I know that there are for sure. I'm blanking on any other ones immediately, but yes, there are.
Okay, Barb asked another. I'm allergic to carrots. So I have avoided parsnips just because they look similar. Are they in the same family?
I should double check and see. My understanding is that they are not in the same family, but I would check beforehand. And Deborah Madison is a cookbook writer who wrote a book called Vegetable Literacy that links things by family. So that would be the first place, and I can go and grab that book and look. But I know some people who, I'm trying to remember, I have a couple friends who are allergic to carrots, and I think that they do eat parsnips, but I would double check it first. And then parsnips actually are another one that is good to wait until after the frost because they get sweeter. So sometimes people will think that they're having a reaction if they have them in the summer because they'll taste very bitter. But once they go through a frost, they get very sweet. So if you've ever had really bitter parsnips, it's probably they hadn't been through a frost yet.
Okay, okay, thank you. And Renee asked, this been very helpful. I was raised on corn, green beans and carrots, canned actually. And I am not at all creative with vegetables, but thank you, she said.
Well, likewise.
And,
I grew up eating a lot of canned vegetables, and I certainly think that there's a lot of, you know, canned vegetables are better than no vegetables, and frozen vegetables are a good option too. So, you know, there's lots of ways to do it. And I think that one of the troubles with the local food movement is that there tends to be a lot of like if you don't shop at a farmer's market, you know, 4 times a week, there's like a shaming around that. And I don't buy it. I think that, you know, shop wherever you shop and, you know, find ways that you can work them in and, you know, buy the things that you are comfortable with. And then you can slowly add in new things, but there's no right or wrong way to do it. And I think everyone is just trying to do the best they can. I know I certainly am. There are definitely, yesterday I had fried chicken for lunch and dinner. And I don't think I ate a single vegetable yesterday. So it happens. And, you know, it's really, I think for me, it was about cooking, a lot of times for my dad in mind, because he was a real kind of meat and potatoes person, but he loves all foods and is excited to try them. It's not in his repertoire. So wanting to kind of expand those horizons. And I think the fastest way to not want to expand what you're curious about is to feel shame around it. So anytime that creeps up, I encourage people just to set it aside and go back to what you know, and that's perfectly fine.
Okay, I think that, okay, there is, first congrats to, okay, Ellen. Hi, Uma, it's Ellen. She was actually my former colleague. And okay, she said, it's first congrats to Ebra on your success. We love to support Michigan authors. My question is, does your book help with the storage of veggies? My problem is they look so great at the market. I buy too much and hate to have them to go to waste. To go waste. I know.
I have the same issue, and so yes, every vegetable has a section that has a storage notes, so ways to store it the longest, and then hopefully just by having lots of different ways to use them up. But it's certainly an issue. I mean, it happens to everybody that a bunch of lettuce or whatever sits in the back of the fridge too long and gets real kind of slimy. But I think that when people always ask this question about, how do I not waste vegetables? I always say the best thing to do is, if you're, not sure what's in your fridge, you're not sure what you're going to have for dinner, just don't go to the store. And you can probably make something out of what you have at home. And so if there's a way to do that, and then you can just kind of go through your fridge and find all of those little odds and ends. I always end up with like 1 carrot and like a quarter head of cauliflower and like 4 green beans for some reason. And there's a couple recipes in the book that are good to kind of hoover up all of those odds and ends. One of my favorites is it's that same tuna mayo that was on the cauliflower salad, but over top of a baked potato. And then the baked potato is loaded up with shaved vegetable salad. So cauliflower, carrots, cabbage, any of those things dressed with that tuna mayo, and then piled out on top instead of sour cream. And I just love a baked potato for dinner. I mean, it's such a good meal, and it doesn't have to just be the baked potato that I think we all grew up with, which I still love, with butter and sour cream and chives, but it can be a vehicle for some other stronger flavors. And that's having a couple of those different recipes are good ways to use up the odds and ends, for sure.
Ellen was our librarian. Actually, she worked with the CMPL and she knows what she's meant. Okay, I don't see any other questions, Ebra, and it was a wonderful program. Actually, we really enjoyed it. Everybody enjoyed it.
Well,
we love.
I'm so grateful to be here. Thank you for inviting me and for welcoming me into your homes on a Wednesday evening. So I hope to see you all at Grainer Farm, or hopefully we can do an in-person event at your library as soon as we get through this pandemic, and then everybody will be wanting to visit. So
yeah, so there are lovely comments from Ruthan. Wonderful program. We really enjoyed it. Definitely, I'm going to try that garam masala yogurt with cauliflower. It's my favorite cauliflower. And thank you very much. And everybody, thank you very much for attending this program. And there is another comment. Wonderful comment for you, Ebra. This was great. Thank you for sharing. Excited to check out your book. So great program. Thank you. So a lot of good comments. And as Ellen, our librarian, as she mentioned, that we always love to support our Michigan authors. And this is a wonderful program. Thank you very much, Ebra. We really appreciate for your time. And thank you very much for all our participants, those who have participated today. I'm sure you all enjoyed it. Thank you. Have a good evening and stay safe.
Thank you. You too. Appreciate it.